Beneath a cool moonlit sky, one guard calls out to the other, asking if he's ever heard about Nighthawk, and bro deadass asked if he meant night whore, but the other assured him that they're not in that type of business. What he actually meant though was the hitman. You know, the one that wiped out the Tachibana family. Word on the street is that they've shown up in this city, but bro isn't believing a single word since that's just an urban legend, and demanded that they got back to work. But when he didn't hear anyone reporting back to him, he began to panic, asking why no one was responding. But unfortunately for him, he was about to go night-night. The next morning, Hajime Hayashi, president of the temp agency, was found dead in his house, and it was filed as a mysterious circumstance along with 34 of his bodyguards. The massacre, later known as the Last Hunt, was swiftly kept under wraps to avoid causing a scandal, being mentioned only briefly on the morning news, as the one known as Nighthawk spread her wings and disappeared into the night, never to be seen again. But now the once legendary Nighthawk is just a thick 33-year-old who's a bum. Introducing our MC Yotaka, it's as she laid there playing her favorite gacha that she couldn't help but notice a certain character who had some big old melons. And while glancing down at her own chest, a devious smile stretched wide, when suddenly someone had called out to her. Immediately she recognized him and mentions how she's a woman living alone and the least she could do is close her door. But she doesn't give a damn if someone were to break in at this point. Yet he just thinks it's common sense. But now that she thinks about it, he sure does stop by a lot. And, well, his reasoning is that her place is a lot closer than the park's smoking area, since he isn't allowed to smoke at work. Plus, he's not gonna let some bum of a hitman rot away in her room forever. And she needed to check this man, because he needs to watch his tone. After all, she is older than him. It's been exactly 8 years since the last hunt, and he had no idea people could change this much just right after quitting their job. Like, bro had to double back and ask just how old she was again, because there's no way they're sagging that much. Like, she had him thinking back to the good old days. But then she noticed him reaching for something, and after mentioning that it was his lunch, she promptly told him to give it over. But if he did, then he wouldn't have anything to eat himself. And if she wanted it that badly, she should take her broke ass and go buy one herself. But in her defense, store bentos are way too small and overpriced. And it had him wondering if she was really that broke now. Like, I know I just called her a bum, but I was mostly just joking. It seemed that even after retiring, she blew all the money she earned killing on gambling and gacha games. Not only that, but she tried a few part-time jobs, but couldn't get any of them to stick. And now she's stuck begging for his lunch. And to be honest, with rent coming up for her crappy old apartment, she's really in the deep. And just the thought of having to face her current reality was enough to make her shed a tear. And if that's the case, he asked if Yotaka needed a job. Sure, his agency's not doing great at the moment either. Well, you know, not that it was ever that great of a business in the first place, but rival companies have been popping up everywhere and stealing all their workers. And because of that, the higher-ups are just dying for Nighthawk to make a comeback, to see the glorious return of the legend. Plus, if she were to return, she'd get that sweet cash, and they'd get their comeback. So it's a win-win situation. So he asked her if she'd like to work for them again, all while reassuring her that they'll have her back all the way. And as she took her time to get off her feet, she stood before him. And she isn't taking this serious at all, as she simply replied with a no. And only God himself knows just how much this man is fighting back demons trying not to slap her. She explained that she quit to begin with because she genuinely despised the job. So she wanted him to take a hint, since once a bond is severed, it just doesn't come back. Kinda similar to how damaging the supporting tissue can make the boobies lose that nice round shape. And to be honest, if that's the case, and it bugs her that much, he just won't ask again. But now he was wondering where she was headed, and whether he might have pissed her off. but in actuality, she just needed to take a leak and kicked the bathroom door wide open. But this woman has no shame at all, as she began letting it rip with the door wide open, and all this passing of fluids had him thinking back to a conversation he had earlier that day with their company's senior about the return of Nighthawk and how the company would need something catchy for her comeback, while also asking if he was still close to her. And if that's the case, getting in her good graces should be easy, and encouraged him to sweet talk her into working for them again. And as he thought about how pathetic she had become, he genuinely wondered if this was something he wanted to do. But regardless, he assures him that he'll try his best, but can't help but wonder, what if she says no? While his senior right next to him highly doubts it. But if another agency were to snatch her, that'd be really bad for business. So if she says no to them, then she's just dead weight, and orders him to get rid of her. It's while he prepared himself for what came next, he remembered his dagger hidden in his jacket, and as soon as he heard the bathroom toilet flush, he knew it was time. So as he turned towards her, he asked if she had washed her hands, since he genuinely hadn't heard the tap go off, but she just walked right on past him, as if she didn't hear a single word this man just said. But reaching out to her, he offered to give her the rest of his food, and it had genuinely made her day, since all she really wanted was a bite. But thanks to her, he had completely lost his appetite, and thought that it'd be best he get back to work. It's while he stood to his feet that he asked if she didn't mind if he dumped his cigarettes, and right as he walked by her, he quickly drew for his dagger and prepared himself to strike. Within a second, his blade closed the distance at godlike speed, and it was in that instant Nighthawk had been activated. As they both crashed to the floor, Yotaka sighs as he almost had her dirty her hands again. And she isn't talking about earlier when she pissed and forgot to wash her hands, how pointing something like a knife at her was no good, as she might just start remembering her past, and asked him if he got it. And while she threw the knife flat on his chest, she mentions how it must suck being a wage slave, always working yourself away for money. And oh, she wanted him to tell that boss of his that she just so happened to like her current lifestyle just fine, while having zero intentions of going back. But before she could even finish her sentence, she noticed a spilled can just a few feet away from her, and damn near started crashing out over her spilled booze. What made it even worse is that it spilled all over her futon, not to mention it was her last one. So while she called out to him, she wanted him to know that just because of his half-ass ambush, she's now all out of life fuel, and she needed him to give it back. But bro didn't give a damn. He just walked out without saying a word, all while she screams from the top of her lungs that he should get back here. Meanwhile, he on the other hand can't believe she's gotten so heavy these days, and it really has him thinking about the return of the legend known as Nighthawk. When just then, Yotaka's doorbell had went off, and when she had went to open the door, she marveled at the nerve he must have had to show his face again. But standing before her was none other than her landlord, wishing her a good evening. But also, he wanted to know if maybe she had a minute. You see, the thing is, he really doesn't like nagging his tenants like this, but it's gotten to the point where he must ask, when exactly does she have plans to pay her rent? Like, it's been 3 whole weeks now. Damn. Meanwhile, Yotaka's voice barely rose above a whisper as she tries to apologize. But I mean, you know, he gets it. Living alone as a woman can be tough, but there are limits to those kind of things, you know? Like, just look at this place. In there looks like a damn zoo. Plus, haven't the water been cut off? So how does she wash her hands, flush, or even shower? Like, does she not feel any sort of shame? Not to mention she 33. Damn. Nah, she really needs to pull herself together. Like, isn't it time she started thinking about marriage? And to wrap it all up, to think he had believed her when she said she was on a recharge break. But no cap, she's just unemployed. He needed to let her know that he isn't running some sort of charity, but rather, he actually has bills to pay. So as much as it pains him to say it, if she isn't able to pay 3 months worth of rent within a month, then her ass is grass. It's as she took a moment to register it all, her landlord mentioned that that would be all, while also letting her know that he had left an eviction notice for her to read, and closes the door on his way out. And with all this paperwork laid out before her, she took the opportunity to check just how much she had in her savings account. And she deadass only had about 221 yen. That's like $2. And that's when she knew she was completely hopeless. Meanwhile, the gentleman from earlier couldn't help but notice just how strong Yotaka's alcohols were, and wondered if maybe she drank stuff like this all the time, when suddenly her dark cold eyes had flashed through his mind, and within a moment he sensed her aura, and it looks like she showed up. So right as he turned around, there she was, pressed against the store glass, and as she stood face to face with him, heavy and out of breath, she pleaded with him to please give her a job. For her new job, Yotaka has a few requirements. First things first, she doesn't want anything with killing involved. But not only that, but she wants them to pay a ton, with barely any work required. Not to mention, she doesn't want to feel tired, but rather, a job where she can just stand around and look pretty should do the trick. Oh, plus free food. And of course this man already knows that that's not possible, asking if maybe she was screwing with him by any chance. But she's actually dead serious. Sure, he's really glad she's willing to work with the company again, but wonders if maybe she's taking this too lightly, since, you know, she'll be evicted if she can't make any money. While on the other hand, Yotaka thinks he should be showing her a little bit more respect. After all, she is a legend. Not counting just now though when she had to beg him for a job. That one doesn't count. And even so, he agrees that she should start with something easy. And when she asked him why, he took a good long look at her, as he tries to put it in a nice way. But if we're keeping it a buck, she's too fat to move the way she used to. But in her honest opinion, a brat like him wouldn't understand, since guys love a woman with a little extra to grab. Plus, if she really wanted to, she could knock this job right out of the park, asking if he had forgotten that she just whooped his butt yesterday, which led him to ask if she'd even be able to fit into her old uniform. And with the utmost confidence, she was willing to bet him that she could. Yet, moments later, she couldn't even remember where she had put it. And it seems like from where she's standing, she's got one hell of a dump truck. But not before long, she had found it, mentioning how nostalgic it all felt just to hold it in her arms again. And to be honest, all he saw was a dirty piece of cloth. But for her, it dragged her back to the good old days, when she got shot at and almost died. But now it was the moment of truth. She'll be heading into change, so he better prepare to feast his eyes on her banging body, and closes the door behind her. But what happened shortly after was her desperate struggle to get it on, and needless to say, it was a bit on the tighter side. But hey, I mean, you know, at least she's wearing it. But for her, it was much deeper than that, as all she wanted was for him to praise her at least a little. But really, all she did was forcibly stuff herself in it, asking if she didn't notice something was wrong when she looked in the mirror. But all she saw was how her badonkadonk kinda looked like that of a hamster's butt. Honestly though, she's definitely not like her younger self, since everything's just sagging, and it's even sadder now because he actually knew what she looked like before, thinking that she had put on a little extra weight. But not being able to handle the heat, she asked if he could quit grilling her already, asking if maybe bullying older women was his thing now. But with that slight movement, her uniform had somehow torn in places neither you nor I know where. But while placing both his hands on her shoulder, he needed her to listen up, as it's time she faces reality, stepping right onto the scale. And it was so bad, they had to blur it. Even Yotaka herself couldn't even bear to look at it. And apparently, she's up about 40 pounds since her active days. So if they ever hope to get her hired, she'll need to at least be close to her former weight. He knows she whooped him yesterday fair and square, but at this point, giving her a job in her current state would be a huge risk. It seems like she's got no other choice but to work hard. And the first thing was to go for a jog. And with cardio being the fastest way to lose weight, Her first goal was to head towards the smoking area near the station, as he'll be waiting there for her. And so she ran into the sunset, with her howls trailing behind her, as she carried the weight of all the misery she had endured. It's when she had finally made it to the station that she had let out a deep sigh, all while she chugs down 2 cups of water that felt like absolute heaven. But someone had caught her attention off in the distance, noticing a cute girl, and she found herself thinking how nice it must be to be young, as she was once like that too just a few years ago. But just then, something else had caught her attention, as a man slowly walked towards the young lady while shopping, and swung his grocery tray beneath her skirt, revealing a cell phone buried beneath his items, and proceeded to walk right on past her, all while Yotaka simply watched as he exited the store. It wasn't long after he had made it outside that he took his phone out of his pocket and proceeded to send a message thanking his client for the job with an attached video file. But right as he was about to hit send, bro blinked and noticed his phone wasn't in his hand, as Yotaka had taken it without him even noticing, asking if he was earning pocket money by filming upskirt videos. And he was so confused, it left him questioning not her identity, but her nature, as he asked, "What are you?" But Yotaka just ignored his question, as it really is amazing what smartphones can do these days. They can even zoom in real close. But she guessed that while he was at it, he might as well should pose and say cheese. But damn, his close-up looks scary as hell. Then again, she'd probably look rough herself close up too. Meanwhile, this man is fuming and pulls out a taser while demanding that she gives it back. But at this point, she's really sick and tired of people always trying to walk all over her. After all, him of all people should have an idea who she is. And without having much time to react, his phone had been tossed towards his face, straight up clapping this man in his forehead. But as the phone spun in mid-air, it began to record a video, all while Yotaka came in closer, closing the gap between the both of them, and began by disarming him by straight up karate chopping his taser out his hand. But it was followed up by a goddamn throat punch to his esophagus as the recording hit the 1 second mark. And at the 2 second mark, she proceeded to launch this man in the air, already winding up a swinging kick aimed at his face, and straight up knocked his ass out, just as the timer hit 3 seconds. And just before the phone was about to strike the floor, she snatched it out of mid-air, noticing how her back after that one move had been killing her, how she really must have gotten heavier, and figured she should probably report this guy. All while she wonders if it would be possible to do that online these days. But now that she's taking a closer look, this guy had been going crazy with these photos, as his whole gallery is just a bunch of low-angle panty shots. Yet she couldn't help but notice how much nicer these girls' butts were, as the firmness is completely different from her own. Like the way that they're all perky and springy makes her feel like they're defying gravity. But hell, at this point, she might as well just get back to running. Plus all that moving around earlier just made her hungry. When taking a step forward, she yet again noticed something. How this guy's wallet had been lying on the floor, with around 6,000 yen inside, which is worth roughly around $38. And needless to say, this woman was fighting back demons right now, trying everything within her power not to rob this man. Meanwhile, Yotaka's former co-worker lets out a puff of smoke, thinking to himself that Yotaka had been late, and wonders where she could have gone off to, when suddenly a nearby billboard had made an announcement advertising their brand new horse mackerel sashimi. Yet right above it displayed some breaking news, as the KKG's CEO, Koji Nakajima, was found dead after his heart suddenly stopped. But he wasn't the only one who noticed the news, as someone behind him had also commented on it being a cardiac arrest, as well as how convenient the phrase was, since if the heart stops beating, no matter how the person died, it's a cardiac arrest. But curiosity got the better of him as he leaned in closer, asking Yotaka's junior how he thought the CEO had really died. As he did so, he held his bag firmly to his back, fully aware of the loaded gun inside, since, you know, rumor has it that this man had been shot. But Junior wanted to know, since when did the police started threatening civilians, and called him by his name, Takada. but he doesn't want to hear squat since their assassin industry had been getting rowdy lately, with all these big shots getting picked off left and right. Not to mention that he heard they've been taking contracts from overseas, and at this point wonders if they've been trying to turn Japan into a war zone, leaving him to wonder if Yotaka's little friend here would want to have a cardiac arrest right now, since it would do the world a lot of good. But as Junior sees it right now, it's a bit too late for that, since this place has been a battlefield for a long time now, whether he pulls the trigger or not. But also, Junior had no intentions of letting that threat slide, all while he turned around to ask if he'd like them to throw hands, right here and right now. But Buddy wasn't ready for all that smoke, mentioning that he was merely just joking. And since the police force owes someone called Murakumo big time, he should just consider it as a friendly warning, and be sure his people receive the message as well. It's as Junior stood there that he slowly leaned over, letting out a huge sigh, since what the hell was that cop thinking? Like, that was clearly a threat just now. And it seems even public security has noticed how big this turf war has gotten. And now that he thinks about it, he wonders if he's really about to drag Yotaka into another war. When speaking of the devil, there she was behind him, apologizing for having him wait, as she stopped by a nearby convenience store to get a whole bunch of snacks. And at this point, he's just disgusted as Yotaka proudly munches down on her snacks before him. As the hitman Nighthawk slowly walked through the dark pitch halls, she raised her gaze to the herd of men rushing towards her, and in the space of a heartbeat, her feet began to move, going head to head with her opponents and sliding through each and every one of them as she slit their throats, leaving all that surrounded her on the floor to serve as a burial site. It seems years later, the woman once known as Nighthawk is now a worthless bum, as all that could be heard from across the hall was obnoxious singing, leaving Yotaka's neighbor to notice that the noise had been coming from Yotaka's apartment. Her neighbor, Takanashi, would then slide the door open as she announced she was coming in, but Yotaka's singing only got louder and louder as she drew closer, revealing a drunk Yotaka as she sings her heart out while in her undies. Takanashi then moved a little closer, letting her know the whole building could hear her. Not only that, but her whole place smelled like buns, until enough was finally enough, leaving Takanashi no other choice but to relocate her to her own apartment. It's not long after that her rant had began. After all, Yotaka had no idea who the hell her manager thought he was, having her work overtime just for some chump change, so she had no other choice but to walk out on him, having Takanashi wondering if she really just ditched her shift halfway through, and Yotaka needed her to listen up, since if something at work were to ever piss her off, then Takanashi should just leave. Like, don't let them push her around just because she's young. And let's just say somehow, Takanashi had ended up drinking, but in her opinion, that's just how jobs are. Like, it's completely normal to be pissed off. And from the way she spoke, Yotaka could tell she was the responsible type. But that's not the case at all for Takanashi, as she's just afraid if anything, since it's not like she wants to work either. But once you're an adult, there's bills and stuff that you need to pay. And if she just so happens to slack off now, then there's no telling what would happen to her in the future. So it's not like she could just suddenly up and quit. But, you know, she had shortly taken it all back after realizing that everything she had just said could be applied to Yotaka. And having heard enough, Yotaka desperately wanted to run from her reality, as she quickly tries to open yet another can of beer, and began chugging the whole thing down, before shortly stopping to allow that booze to work its way through her body, slowly getting drunk by the second. And once it had finally hit the sweet spot, she was back to her usual drunken self, commenting on how cute and responsible Takanashi was. But instead of drowning her sorrows in booze, Takanashi wanted to suggest that she talked with someone instead, for instance her boyfriend. But Yotaka actually didn't have a clue who the hell she was talking about. And, you know, he's referring to the tall guy with the weird eye. But Yotaka picked up on it right away. But you see, he's not her boyfriend at all, just more like her junior. But that doesn't sound too convincing, considering just how often he visits her place. but in her opinion, they've known each other forever, and that's why they ended up weirdly close. But unfortunately, that ship had sailed a long time ago, so they're way past seeing each other in that way. Though she must admit, he did kinda look cute. But now, a thick catch like Yotaka would just be wasted on the likes of that guy. But before she could even finish, Takanashi warned her not to smoke inside, and if she wanted to, she'd have to go on the balcony. But just out of curiosity, she wanted to know what she meant by junior, asking if maybe it had been since high school. But actually, Yotaka confirms that it had been from her old job. And come to think of it, Takanashi had no idea what she used to do. But Yotaka only plays it off, mentioning that it was all top secret, and if she told her, she'd have to make her disappear like a magic trick. After all, she is a woman of mystery. But that didn't stop Takanashi from guessing, even though Yotaka desperately wanted to talk about something else, leaving Takanashi to figure that it wasn't a normal job. Maybe she had actually been a model, since she has the small face and long legs for the job. But maybe a hostess would be more appropriate, since she's actually pretty easy to talk to, and would go as far as to bet that older guys would eat her up. But now that she thinks about it, she must have been a failed corn star. Oh, maybe a preschool teacher. A manga artist? Nah, a hentai artist. Or maybe a magical girl. Actually, no, she was definitely a corn star. And as Yotaka stood to her feet to use her balcony for a bit, a drunken Takanashi had come up with her final answer, asking if maybe she was a hitman. The sudden silence sobered Yotaka at once, erasing her drunkenness as if she had never been drunk in the first place. Meanwhile, Junior sits face to face with someone as they asked how Nighthawk had been coming along, and in his opinion, things are going smoothly. But from that one response, they could already tell that he was a horrible liar, and followed up by asking if he had seen the news about KKG. And apparently, this so-called KKG person was one of their best customers, who used to bring them weapons from overseas. But with Nakajima now dead, their supplies are already down 20%. Not to mention all the guys who had lent to them have also vanished, leaving Junior to ask the man across from him if he had any idea who was behind it. And without a doubt, it had to have been Watagi and Being Hope. They're an old-fashioned agency, and those two groups had apparently teamed up, so you can already guess what that means. They'll want in on this little turf war that's going on, and knowing them, they'll do anything to raise their stocks. So naturally, they're looking forward to wiping them out, since they're the top dogs. You see, that's exactly where Nighthawk comes in. They want her to be a sort of barrier between the two. She'll be the one to slow down the enemy, and with any luck, she might even take a few of them down with her. It's like killing two birds with one stone, or well, in this case, one hawk. That's something worth celebrating, as he welcomed the grand return of the Nighthawk. Back at the apartment complex, Yotaka touches the glass door between her and the balcony, asking if Takanashi really wanted to know about her old job that badly. And needless to say, Takanashi was ready and raring to go. So as Yotaka drew the curtains shut, she slowly began to clutch her jacket. As for her old job, she was a failed bikini model, and her pictures were so goddamn awful, they didn't even sell a single copy. So there's basically no records of her at all. And let's just say, Takanashi knew it all along. As Yotaka laid on her back, a hint of sunlight came shining through her room, causing her eyes to slowly open. As she began to sit up from her futon, she reached first for her cigarette and lighter, lighting up and taking a slow puff, before shortly after allowing the smoke to drift from her lips. And all that seems to be on her mind is that a girl's gotta eat. Heading over to the fridge to take a quick peek as to what might be inside, thinking to herself that there are definitely times when adults get the sudden urge to do something sinful. And by that, she definitely means stuffing her body with absolute junk. And just then, she found some pork loins in her fridge, with an expiration date of April 29th. And what do you know? Today's May the 2nd. And as she stood there for a while, she genuinely contemplated if she was about to risk it for the biscuit. But such an opportunity had been absolutely perfect, as the main ingredient had been secured. However, one piece of meat isn't nearly enough to satisfy her, so she needs to go and get some more supplies. And so naturally, you'd think that the next step would be to go to the supermarket, but nah. Yotaka wants to watch a little bit of YouTube first, and right after, clear her dailies for her gacha game. And before she knew it, 3 hours had passed without her moving a muscle. But then finally, she decided it was time to make the trip to the supermarket. But now comes the hard part, as she needs to find the ingredients that would go perfect with her pork loins. And instant noodles kinda screams that you're gonna regret it, so she for sure has to go with that. It's not only cheap, but it's also really bad for her. And that, in her opinion, is definitely luxury. So forget all that fine dining crap, it was time to treat herself to a full-blown heart attack. And of course, she couldn't forget her booze, knowing she would need it to forget her current reality. And as for fried food, she'd patiently wait until they're on discount, not to mention dessert. And so without further ado, it was time to cook. And with her frying the food in a pan, it creates a crapload of smoke in her apartment. So hell, this is the perfect time to light up a cigarette to cancel out the smoke. And now that she's putting the meal together, she has to dump the cooked meat into the noodles, while topping it with some fried food and finishing it off with a lethal amount of mayo. And before you was none other than Yotaka's special. Oh, what the hell is that? But it didn't matter to her at all, as it was finally time to dig in. And as she took the first bite and slurped up her noodles, her eyes widened. A moment later, she reached for her cigarette again and took a deep puff. And holy crap! All the grease, booze, nicotine, and sweat mixing all together makes it so that she can't even tell what the hell she's even tasting anymore. But all she knows is that it's like a party's in her mouth, and she honestly wished she could eat like this every day. And as she laid back on her futon, she had completely cleaned her plate. And as for her brain cells, they had completely been fried due to the alcohol and high blood pressure. But now, she needed to let off some steam. And what better way to do that than some good old karaoke? As she sang softly to herself while the night went on. In the dead of the night, the only sound that filled the air was a dripping sink. And within this pitch-black apartment, a grumbling sound began. And it only got louder as time progressed, with Yotaka curled up in a ball, dying from a horrible stomachache. And the longer it went on, the more she felt like she was about to die. Elsewhere, a janitor couldn't help but notice a wet floor sign in the middle of the hallway. And it was strange to him since he hadn't been the one to put it there. A cold sweat slips down his cheek as he took a step forward. And shortly after, he peeked around the corner, noticing a young man with a silencer in his hand, staring directly back at him, while another laid on the floor dead, as a bullet had been lodged through his head. And as they both made direct eye contact, he cheerfully greeted him. But not only that, the janitor had also been familiar with the killer as well, mentioning it's been a long time. It looks like their job had overlapped, and he wanted to formally apologize for stealing his kill. But it genuinely hadn't mattered, since these sort of things happens all the time. Though specifically as it relates to the man lying on the floor, it was pretty easy to trail him, as he really does have a weak bladder. But while they're both there, they might as well help each other dispose of the body, as one recommends grabbing the legs. And after tossing him in a nearby cart, the killer couldn't help but ask who had been the janitor's client this time around. And well, it seems he's been taking jobs from Watagi and Being Hope, since the pay these days have been insane. So he's basically exclusively with them, which amazed this fellow killer, since they've really been killing it lately. But speaking of that, he wanted to know if the janitor had seen the news about Murakumo, and how it seems like some of his people had already been going after them, and can already tell that things are about to get messy. But sadly, he wasn't able to predict further, with the janitor then popping 2 whole bullets through this man's cranium, as he then tumbled over into the cart with the man he had just killed. And with that out of the way, Shinoda, our undercover janitor, makes a call, since there had been a slight change of plans. asking if it would be possible for Watagi to handle 2 extra bodies. Since, you know, he just figured with less competition, the better things would be, since their next target is none other than Nighthawk. As Junior stood before his boss, he apologized for interrupting his meal, as the new budget proposal just came in, and he wanted him to take a quick look at it. But as he was handing it over, he wanted to ask his captain something, as there's a rumor going around that Nighthawk had actually been working with them, and he wanted to know if he had heard about it. And well, actually, he's not quite sure who started it, but it's a real pain. Still though, if that's the kind of rumor that's going around, then he suppose he had no other choice but to make it official. And Junior knew right away that this man was lying, as he's sure his captain had been the one to spread the rumors in the first place, causing Junior to reiterate that Nighthawk still isn't ready yet, so sending her out on missions would be a bit too dangerous. Sure, his captain is well aware of that, but this is just how things turned out, and that's exactly why he wanted to keep Junior around, for times just like this. And while he rested his hand on his shoulder, he wanted to remind him that he's counting on him to take care of it, and walked right on past him, when just then, a sudden vibration had caused him to jolt as he took his phone out of his pocket, noticing that it had been a call from Yotaka, urgently asking where he was, as she needed him to help her. As he stood over her motionless body, this stomachache was slowly kicking her ass, but Junior on the other hand had only felt disgusted shortly after throwing her medicine to the ground without saying a word, and shortly after mentioning that that's what she gets for eating all that crap. But more importantly, they've got an emergency on their hands. But just in case he hadn't noticed, she had been going through an emergency herself, but he wanted her to take things seriously, as things were actually really bad, especially since word had been spreading around that Nighthawk was back in action, so it's only a matter of time before hitmen started gunning after her. Though he blames himself for being naive, as he never once thought that his captain would go this far, thinking that her cover might already be blown. And to be honest, now that she thinks about it, some guy had actually taken her picture earlier, which had caused Junior to panic, as he wondered why she didn't do something about it. But she cuts him off mid-sentence, as there was no need for him to shout, goddammit. But in his opinion, Yotaka really needed to pay more attention to those kind of stuff, as there's no telling what would happen from here on out. And right as he was about to continue, Yotaka stopped him yet again, as she demands that he watch his tone and be nicer to her. She had already told him that her stomach was hurting, and here he goes trying to lecture her as well, when all she really wants is for him to treat her like a princess, to take care of her, rub her tummy, and tuck her in, as that shouldn't be that difficult of a request. But she wasn't done yet, as she also wanted him to feed her, clean her room, take out the trash, buy her booze, pay her rent, and clear off her debt. But saying bro didn't give a damn is an understatement, as he stood to his feet mentioning that he was heading out, as he plans on setting up a safe house for her. And so until then, he didn't want her going outside, and asked if she understood, but she only mocked him as if she were a child, and bro genuinely did not have time for it. So as Yotaka leaned back on her futon, she genuinely wondered where she was supposed to go when she's suffering from such a horrible stomachache. But as soon as she said that, she couldn't help but sit up once more, as it had been completely gone. And she didn't waste no time, because she went out to roam the outdoors, before shortly after thinking to herself that she had absolutely been starving. And right as she had the thought, she smelled something incredible in the distance, before shortly after stumbling upon an obenyaki food stall. She made her purchase and wondered if she should eat them now or grab something salty to scarf them down with. It's as she relished in her new food that the previous janitor had spotted her from behind, causing him to wonder if that had actually been Nighthawk. But there was only one way to find out, and it was by trailing her. But she had suddenly made a sharp left turn, prompting him to reach into his bag as he stepped forward. And once he had turned the corner, he noticed she had walked into a completely pitch black alley. And that's when his suspicion grew, causing him to be on his guard, as suddenly Nighthawk swung from behind him, just purely grazing the side of his head. but he too was on his guard as he shot right behind him, also barely missing Nighthawk by an inch. And as he repositioned his gun, they both slid their feet across the battlefield. But the only difference was that this man was already out of breath, thinking to himself that that was close. Actually, too close. To think she would have noticed him from so far away, so there was absolutely no doubting it. This was really Nighthawk. Thankfully, he was able to react just in time, and luckily for him, she wasn't able to take his gun. Plus, he's not injured. Not to mention this old hag is pretty rusty, so he should have the upper hand. But without allowing him to finish his thought, Yotaka called out to him, wondering if he was just gonna stand there since she was ready and raring to box. Not to mention, her food had been getting cold. He threw his bag to the floor and began to take off his jacket, as he mentioned that she was right, so they should get right to it, placing his gun in position while Yotaka gets into her stance, with a little rumbling in her tummy. Yo, it's your boy Noodles, and I appreciate y'all for watching the video, man! Thank you for sticking all the way to the end, and again, if you want more peak fiction, then check out his co-worker gets him ripped after his wife cheated on him, and I'll see you guys on the other side.